So I would think insurance companies, which are starting to wake up a little bit about climate change risk, would also be a little bit concerned about safety of oil cars going through. But so far, they're not so much. So the dry and sort of dull stuff that Laura does best is reading through thick documents, responding with technical comments as to why the analysis might not be adequate. An environmental impact statement will often have a series of alternatives. One of them will be don't do anything, and one of them will be just what the railroad or the oil company wants. And so you have to dig in on that stuff. And the Stand Up to Oil group, for a while when Laura was out on a trip, I listened in for about a month, and boy, those guys are so smart. I just was taking notes, and very technical stuff, and very good organizers in organizations and similar attorneys throughout the Northwest. So that kind of work of making sure that you can potentially litigate, challenge a project, that's what worked to stop all these coal facilities and most of the oil facilities. There hasn't been one built. There's still a couple that are up in the air whether or not they'll actually get built or not, but there's still a lot of legal avenues, in my opinion, to stop those facilities. So I'll keep moving on here. So we talked about that. That's downtown Spokane. That's about 3 blocks from our offices at the Lands Council. We can look out one of our windows and see oil cars going by frequently, as well as coal cars. The hearings. And hearings are really interesting because Laura's really good at setting up hearings, and she does it like a true activist does, and that's, you can send out an email and you'll get a certain response, but she'll get a crew together and they'll phone bank everybody in. And so for anything you're doing, that's really your most effective. Is even if you leave a message, that tends to prompt people more than just an email. Texting can also work. So she would get hundreds of people at these hearings, and often, even though the hearings were run by the Department of Ecology, you also strategically have people in the audience, and everyone gets their 3 minutes, and so you can try to kind of make sure that everyone gets their point of view said. And it's great having kids testify at hearings. It's great having, seniors like me testify at hearings. Teachers, experts, whatever. You try to get a whole range of people. Boy, when we get like a fire department chief or something to testify at a hearing, that is so powerful. So you think about who your audience is going to be and who your hearing is going to be. And the railroads and oil companies have kind of gotten smart too. Like one hearing we all wore orange, and that was kind of to show the solidarity. And then the next hearing they were down in Tri-Cities, Pasco, and they all had the same color on and stuff. So, you kind of each other's tricks, I guess, is my point there. So, the other idea that Laura wanted, and she kind of wrote this script, there's tribal solidarity, except for one tribe on not mining coal. There's tribal solidarity on not putting these new facilities up. The Lummi tribe almost single-handedly stopped one of the oil refineries up by Bellingham. Their tribal fishing rights, their ability to be equal players with the state government, because they're sovereign government. And so that really helped out. And the tribes are very much opposed and trying to do what they can to I know the Spokane tribe is putting up just tens of thousands of solar panels, and they're making a real effort to shift away from fossil fuels. And so I can't say enough about how well the tribes are taking on this issue and just doing amazing work to stop some of these facilities. And then communities along the line, from Montana to Sandpoint to Post Falls, all these little towns along the way are also stepping up. At least some individuals in those towns are certainly stepping up. And that's important stuff. Helen Yost does a lot of work up in Sandpoint and organizes people around that bridge to and not build that second bridge. So people like that do a great job. I mentioned the railroad crossing, how it can slow down school buses, commuter traffic, emergency vehicles. The amount of air pollution that is from diesel particulates, and trains run diesel engines, the PM 2.5 is particularly bad because it's just small enough that it can get down in your lung and really cause damage, whereas a bigger, like ash thing, wouldn't have quite as much impact. Diesel engines, and we have not been able to figure out how to get Burlington Northern. They can do it, they could spend the money and have much cleaner ones. And they do in California, but they're not doing it here. We still have a lot of these old polluting diesel engines. And if you're living along the rail line, and as we all know, in many places, low-income people are the ones who live along the rail line. And so that's a big issue for human health. And, you know, not only the noise and the rumbling of the trains, but just that dirtier air. And the railroad tends to run into low parts of the valley, so it kind of tends to sit down there as well. In Spokane, we have it crossing the Spokane River, 2 main tracks crossing the river, as well as Hangman Creek. And of course, any kind of an oil spill, or even a coal spill, is shown to cause a lot of problems, but an oil spill in particular can just wreak havoc on the water supply. In Spokane, we have our aquifer, which is interchanged with our river at various places. Some places the aquifer is feeding the river, and some places the river is feeding the aquifer. So you can imagine putting a bunch of oil, volatile, and even coal in those situations is not going to be very good for the fishery or for our water quality. So we want to think about that. We have had, you know, hearings since it's part of ecology. They've all been held in Washington State, but we've had great presence from Idaho and Montana people, including some people from Moscow. It's even possible some of you have been to those hearings. And that's pretty critical because, like I say, the railroad runs through all these small towns. It runs through, you know, into Lake Ponderay. It runs, you know, some of them are run by the Clark Fork. And so these are all water bodies that Idahoans and Montanans are very, you know, thoughtful of as well. So I talked about the loonies. Well, the one tribe, the Crow tribe in Montana, has been in favor of any coal extraction. They've had partial ownerships, but all the other tribes, even in Montana, are opposed to it. And I'm not going to go into the politics of why that might be. We know there's some issues with the Navajo tribe too, and impacts. And not everybody in a tribe wants to do the same thing, just like in regular our society. So. So I want to shift a little bit into talking about gas in a second, but before I do, I want to mention that there's an Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, EFSEC is what it's called. So when it came to this Vancouver terminal, which I mentioned was the largest one and the last one, they actually, and they're kind of appointed by the governor, they actually really took up and I think it's because of all the hearings, they took up the issue very seriously, and they recommended not building this site because of the impacts it would have on other businesses in the Port of Vancouver. So EFSEC turns out to be a very strong agency in addition to the Department of Ecology. And there was a lot of pressure to get the governor to speak up, particularly during his presidential run. And he did. I think it was last May. He actually spoke up and said he opposed a couple of these facilities. One was a methanol facility. And so that pressure does work. And it works when you have hundreds of people at a hearing as opposed to 3 people at a hearing. You can just imagine. Part of life as activists, and Laura will tell you this, you got to show up. So she's been great at that. Yeah, even Spokane Valley, which is a pretty conservative city, but they have a lot of these railroad crossings that grade. Spokane Valley wrote in opposition. some of these facilities. Yeah.
Are we talking LNG here? Is this the?
I'm sorry, I kind of pushed this one too soon. Let's go back to that.
Oh,
I'll get into LNG in a minute.
oh, all right.
Yeah, sorry, I pushed the button a little too soon. So I'm still talking about the oil terminals and the gas terminals. And the EFSEC, the Energy Council that the governor has appointed, and those guys have really stand it up. So there are some points that I wanted to make about why things worked. And I mentioned this, there were a lot of people in the room all wearing red, holding small signs because you weren't allowed to cheer or clap or anything like that, staying on message but telling their own stories. There were hundreds of people went to those hearings, literally, and probably thousands throughout the state. Got those people by mailing things to them, and I mentioned phone banking. They called thousands of people literally on the phone to do that. And I mentioned how they were managing the hearings. There was a lottery at one of them where you had to draw a number because there was not enough time for everyone to speak. Well, they made sure if you had 200 people there and they pro-oil or pro-coal people had 5 people there, your odds were going to be a lot better. You were going to draw a lottery and get to speak. And trying to get elected officials, nurses and doctors, children, first responders, union members, people of color, and tribal members to speak at those hearings, I think was very powerful. I think one thing that really swayed ecology and EFSEC was that it was a number of communities, and people would show up from these little farm towns. They go out through the Palouse, and then they show up from Vancouver and stuff, and Spokane as well, Spokane Valley. I think that had a big influence. It was not just going to impact Vancouver. It was going to impact a few dozen communities, and it really was going to make a big difference for a lot of people throughout the state. And I think that had a huge impact on it. And I think people come down from Sandpoint saying, hey, what about Idaho? That made a big difference too. Working with our elected officials, the governor I mentioned, those 3 entities, Power Pass Coal, Power Pass Fracking, Stand Up to Oil, there's some overlap, as you might imagine, in membership. They all work together very closely. And then I've noticed that with the Idaho groups, particularly since we're right near Idaho, Laura has worked with those groups a lot to carry the message into Idaho as well. And the Montana Environmental Council, MEIC, they also have been really strong at opposing a lot of these facilities, and that's kind of where a lot of that stuff is coming from. Okay, now we're ready to go to this. So, liquefied natural gas is fracked, and fracking oil is that, which is fairly new. A lot of these reserve, and they frack for oil as well. Obviously, they don't frack for coal. But in my understanding of it, you're able to go down in a hole and then you go horizontally and you break stuff up. And so that suddenly, instead of having to drill a hole where there's every 100 barrels of oil, you can access an entire oil field or an entire gas field. And then it's a horrible process. They pump water down these things, and then they get this sludgy oil, water, usually has gas with it. They pump out, and some of the facilities that they've been fracking gas in the back in the east, there have been all these health impacts. People are seeing respiratory things if they live near one of the terminus where the well comes up.